The African American Legend series highlights the accomplishments of blacks in areas as varied as politics, sports, aviation, business, literature, and religion. We will explore how African Americans have succeeded in areas where they'd been previously excluded because of segregation, racism, and lack of opportunity. I'm your host, Dr. Roscoe C. Brown, Jr., and with us today are two wonderful authors, T.R. Simon and Victoria Bond, who've written this great book called Zora and Me about Zora Neale Hurston. Glad to have you with us, Tanya and Victoria.
Yeah, thank you.
You got it, okay?
We're happy to be here.
Okay, now this is very exciting. Zora Neale Hurston is a legend in the black community, in the Harlem Renaissance, great writer, tremendous talent. You've written this book about her childhood, about an experience she had in Eatonville, Florida, where she grew up. Now tell us how you got interested in this. First of all, tell us how you two met, and then how you got interested in this project. So we'll start with you, Vic.
Well, we met about 10 years ago. We both worked in publishing. I was freshly out of college looking for a job, and I applied for an assistant job at an office where Tanya was already working. And I was glad enough and lucky enough to get the job, and cosmic luck meeting Tanya there and forging this partnership and bond.
With Bond, okay.
Yeah.
Victoria.
Well, I think we became friends probably by day 5, right?
I think so, yes.
And then we just did everything together.
Yeah, we went to lunch together, went shopping together, we
Went
were on
home,
the phone,
yeah.
office to office together.
Yeah. Yeah, we just did it. So I think the book, in a sense, is an outgrowth of our friendship. I had the idea of the book when I was pregnant with my daughter.
When did you first learn about Zora Neale Hurston?
Well, this is interesting. One of the things we realized was that neither one of us had heard of Zora until we went to college, right, Vic?
Yeah, pretty
That's
much.
interesting.
Yeah, and that we wanted to rectify that in a
Yeah.
way.
Now,
Like,
let me ask this, where did you go to high school?
well, I went to a number of different high schools. I went to one high school in Virginia that people know called T.C. Williams, and then I graduated from a small boarding school in Austria.
And where did you go to high school?
I went to a boarding school in Hershey, Pennsylvania called the Milton Hershey School. That
called
was
what?
the Milton Hershey School,
yeah, sure.
started by, Milton Hershey, the candy businessman. Yeah, I was there for 5 years.
So you had a lot of chocolate bars where you
Yes, I did. Too many.
Now, the reason I ask that is, why would you not have heard of this great writer while you were in high school?
Well,
Well, I think sexism has a lot to do with it. In elementary school, I grew up in East Orange, New Jersey, where at that time in the 80s, I received, I think, a heavier dose of black history than I think a lot of, students receive now. By the time I was in 4th grade, I already knew who County Cullen was, Claude McKay, Langston Hughes. I had a kind of deep knowledge of Harlem Renaissance writers, specifically the poets. But I think that the women also of this era are too often left out of the conversation, and especially the exposure to smaller kids.
Now, in your case, why do you think you didn't hear about it?
I think for many of the same reasons. I think that, to the degree that we probably all knew who Langston Hughes was, we didn't hear about Zora, and it wasn't until Alice Walker actually in the 70s went and marked her grave and then wrote that seminal essay about her that she really began to be re-embraced by the Academy, and that had a trickle-down effect then into the general readership. But I think we both missed that in our childhood, and we really wanted to give young people a book that could show them how incredible she was and whet their appetites for her adult work.
Sexism reigns throughout society, and it influences the black community as well as does the white community. And Zora Neale Hurston was challenging some of those stereotypes. Tell us a little about some of the stereotypes she challenged.
Wow. Well, I think Zora's life has a very fascinating trajectory because after her mother dies and she goes to boarding school, she really doesn't return home from then. So by the time...
How old was she when her mother died?
12. So by the time, say, she's 13 or 14, she's really out in the world on her own. So I think that early experience of loss and how it infused her with a kind of independence made her a lot different than other women of the day, because she was accustomed to being alone, not having a kind of familial anchor anymore. So I think when we read about Zora doing her folklore in her car with, you know, her gun and all this kind of stuff, which now seems amazing, it makes a deeper sense in terms of her individual self and life. But in the context of what women were doing then, it was unheard of. It's unheard of now.
Even now.
Yeah.
Yes.
When she came to Harlem, what kind of reception did she get?
I think it's not the reception she got, it's the impression she made.
Very good. Excellent, excellent.
I think that Zora was so irrepressible that wherever she went, she was noticed. So it was only a matter of hours, really, before people knew Zora was in town.
What did she do to get to be noticed?
Storytelling, telling stories.
She was great at that. What about the social life? Did she have a great social life?
Well, she did, right?
Yeah.
She was the center of every party.
Right.
Wherever she went, people gathered around her. So, you know, within a matter of months, really, she was friends with Langston Hughes, I mean, Esther Williams, I mean, the roster just goes on and on. But I think she also always had a really clear vision. And I think that's one of the things that was so important for Vicki and I when we were learning from her in the process of writing, that she always knew that she wanted to produce culturally. And she never let anything get in the way of that. And one of the things we talk about a lot is how she was actually an anti-materialist in a lot of ways, that she felt that she needed to stay free in order to produce her art under all kinds of circumstances. And clearly segregation and racism and sexism were always, you know, making it difficult for her as a black woman writer at that time to define herself as a writer.
But how did she support herself since things were so tough?
But this is when
rent
it
party.
gets dicey. Yeah, there are rent parties and there are patrons. You know, Mrs. Osgood was a patron to both Langston Hughes and Zora. So there's this very fraught relationship to this kind of this white aristocracy that you feel bound to because they fund your work. At the same time, your work belongs to you. And I think that was something that really got under Zora's skin, that this idea that the funder could own the work. And I think this is in part why her financial life is so precarious, because her work is her master.
Well, she didn't really get recognized by the larger community until, what, the 1970s, when her book was republished?
Yeah, I mean, she received recognition in her lifetime, and Their Eyes Were Watching God was certainly well received. But Vicki and I would argue that even today, she's
she
not
doesn't
fully
receive
given her due.
the credit that she's due. But I think it speaks to the peaks and the valleys in anyone's life. You know, she comes to Harlem, she wins all this contest, she goes to Barnard, she gets a Guggenheim Fellowship.
She studies with Franz Boas.
Right, she's able to write
contemporary with
all
Ruth Benedict,
of these
Margaret Mead.
books. You know, but in her own lifetime, she saw all of her achievements in a way get swept under the rug. And I think it says something really important to all of us about visibility and acknowledgement. You know, you can be doing really important work and people might not acknowledge you. More than might not acknowledging you, they might disparage you. But you have to have something stable within yourself that allows you to move forward.
Now, the core of her storytelling, her writing, was sort of the intrapsychic aspects of the black experience. That's a nice way of putting it.
Well, she, to put it simply, she loved black folks. Like Zora, because Zora came from Eatonville, and that's part of
Eatonville, a small town in Florida, right?
Yeah, the first black incorporated town in the country.
And that's what sparked our imagination together, is that Zora never had a sense, coming from that context in which there was black autonomy, she never had this sense of black inferiority. So she understood that segregation was impinging on her, but inside of herself, right, she carried that kingdom. She carried it. And I think that's what's fascinating is there were all these debates with Elaine Locke, and you know, should we represent Black culture in this way? Should we show ourselves to be vulnerable or not perfect? And Zora didn't care because she couldn't comprehend how Black complexity could ever be reduced to a stereotype. And I think that's one of the things that fascinates both of us about her. One of the things we like to emulate.
Now, when did you finally decide to write the book?
Oh my God. Well, Tanya, you pitched your idea to
I know,
me.
I pitched it. I made her come over. I made lasagna. I forced her to come over. And I sat her down on the couch and I said, look, I have an idea, but I can't do it alone. I need you because Vicki is a brilliant poet. And just, you know, Vicki's just brilliant at everything. So,
Tanya, please.
But
the visionary, Tanya, the visionary.
But so I knew that this thing was huge, and so I said, Vicki, I wanna write a children's book about Zora Neale Hurston, but you have to do it with me because I need all that gorgeous language that you produce.
Well, what caused you to pick this particular incident from her experience?
Because it just, when I read her biography and autobiography, there was just something about it that always stuck in my head. Who, you know, this headless body. What would it have been like for Zora Neale Hurston to think there was a headless body in town? And I don't know why, in my storytelling mind, that just sort of spun, and I thought, you know, Zora would tell a great story about that. And then I thought, I wonder if we could tell a great story about Zora as a child and animate other kids the way that we were animated by our favorite books.
Now, let me ask you, did this really happen in her life?
The Headless Body did.
Yes.
But at the same age?
No. Well, actually, the Headless Body is a reference in her autobiography to a cousin of hers who was murdered in this mysterious way that, in this event, seemed to have deeply impressed her mother. So it was more connected to her mother's sense of loss. So when Zora mentions the headless body, she mentions it in her autobiography as activating sorrow and illness in her mother.
So then you made a detective story out of it?
Yeah.
Well, we fictionalized it, and you know, we want to reach kids.
Yeah, that's the great thing about fiction.
But we wanted it to have the themes of Zora's life, and one of the greatest compliments we've been paid about the book was from Lucy Hurston, her heir, where she said that we got her relationship with her mother right. We wanted to show people where Zora could come from, that there's a place where Black children are unviolated, where they're in tune with nature, where even though, right, they have the difficult experiences of life, they're not undone by them. They have the inner resources to not only cope, but transform and author their lives. I think that was crucial for us.
Yeah, I think, again, why we were attracted to Eatonville specifically because it's a Black incorporated town, but it was a place where we could explore a universe that's not dysfunctional. I think so much of Black life in art gets caught up in a dysfunctional universe. We're not saying that the world is perfect, but we are saying that bad things can happen, but there can be decent people around to deal with them and cope with them.
I mean, we created a Black moral community, which I think existed for Zora, but we made that really explicit in our book, that she's in the embrace of that.
About 600 people, right? And it still exists.
Yes.
Did you go there?
We have not been there.
But we're hoping to. In the beginning of the year, we got an invitation, and we're really excited.
Now, as you wove the story, and you have someone else telling the story, what's the name of the character who tells the story?
Carrie. Carrie's our narrator.
And so she tells the story about this headless body and what caused it to happen, which was a racist incident.
Yes.
Which of course happened to many, many people in the South in the days past. Now, what do you expect young people who read this book to take from it?
Well, I think it's the event in the novel is based around race. But I think
based around?
you're absolutely right. It's a racist event. It's race is the impetus for the murder. But I think in conjunction with that, I think we want to relay a message about identity and duplicity. You know, what are the risks in any situation of not being who you are? And how your own identity crisis, depending on the stakes, could potentially put someone else in danger. You know, so I think we're trying to address something about racial duplicity and identity duplicity, and then also the power of home. You know, I think all of us have conflicted relationships with where we come from, but I think more often than not, people have a lot of love, you know, no
well,
matter
how
what
does
the
that reflect
circumstances
itself
were.
in her relationship with her mother?
In the novel,
Yeah.
her mother is the center.
You created this concept, right?
No,
Well,
I
I
think
think
we
it's
took that.
implicit
We
in
took
Zora's
that
Now,
from
her
her
mother
real
was
life.
central in what way?
Her mother was her advocate, her supporter, the great love of her young life. Her mother let Zora be Zora, and her father was not always a fan of Zora's style. And her mother, I think, really protected her and made sure that that boundless curiosity and that irrepressible spirit did not get broken. And I think that's really important, particularly since, you know, as Black folks, we would sometimes season each other. You know, in Black parenting, there can be that sense that you have to break your child before the world breaks you. And that is the antithesis of what Zora experienced.
You see, that's a metaphor for the challenges that Black youth face today. How can I be myself in this world where there's no legal segregation, but there's still racism and discrimination?
And
how do you face that? I'm sure each one of you in your own lifetime has faced some aspect of racial discrimination.
Continue
You can't
to.
be Black. As I said, anybody who thinks that racism is gone, just try to go out on Fifth Avenue and hire a taxi cab at 10 o'clock at night when you're going uptown. So that's one of the issues. Now, you would hope that white kids and Black kids read this, and what would you...
I read Caddy Woodlawn as a child, and I took so much from it. In fact, this book is in part inspired by my love of Caddy Woodlawn, and this is a little white girl on the Wisconsin frontier. Because when you have an indelible character, it doesn't matter what race they are. You take the best from them. So I'd hope that white children would want to take the best from Zora, because she has so much to give them. And for Black children, I think we really want to say that for us as a people, self-esteem is crucial. We need to really talk about how we cultivate love and how we protect ourselves from traumatic influence.
Right. And I think how we build self-esteem. I think one of the primary messages of the novel, especially to young girls, is that appearance does not last forever, but what you put into your mind and how you cultivate it and how you try to process your experiences and be an alive intellect in the world can. And I think that's one of...
Now, how does the book
And
tell
that
that?
sincere friendship based on esteem.
Yes.
But in
will
this
carry
age
you.
of Botox injection to sleep young forever, how does a book carry out the message that it isn't how you look, it's what you are that counts?
Well, how Zora experiences the world is through storytelling. So when she walks out and something happens, she takes that into her processor, and then she begins, her cogs start turning, and she's asking, how did this happen? And why did it happen? And I'm going to make an effort to find out how it happens. I think in this day and age, people are so worried about Botox, they're not, you know, they're not putting their energy toward actually having fruitful interests.
I think I'm going to almost quote Ovid, but it's like we have to be careful that form does not conquer substance. And in our book, we try to really represent substance.
Yeah, I was interested in that. As I read, I saw this beautiful dialogue, this interaction. I was wondering who wrote what and how you managed to collaborate. Did you write a piece and then she says, I want to write a piece? Or did you both write the same piece and then
We're
take
both in
from
it
it?
in different ways. Vicki really drafts a lot of the gorgeous language, and then we come in and we massage it through drafts until we really get our vision in line. But also, this speaks to our friendship. There are a lot of things we don't have to talk about because we're resting on a decade of knowing each other. So it's like we can transmit a lot without ever speaking, right? Like we never have to ask, do you think this would be a good way to proceed? It's like we're always in tune.
Right.
Yeah.
And I think, because also I think our ideas are often complementary. You know, so when we went through the reading together, Tanya had ideas, I had ideas, but our ideas are often, they're not in conflict.
No.
Our ideas can exist side
we're
by
one
side.
person. You complete
Yeah.
me.
That's so funny. So they can enrich each other. You know, our ideas help to highlight the best in the other person.
Yeah.
Do you think this make a good movie?
You know what? I yearn to be in a world where people want to see a movie about a spunky, unviolated little Black girl. I yearn to live in that world. So yes, I want people to want to embrace Zora. I want people to want to read all of Zora's work. I mean, Zora is one of the greatest writers of the 20th century. Did you see how I got all
Yes.
weepy and impassioned there?
Good.
Now, going back to the Harlem Renaissance, as you mentioned, it was really supported by white wealthy patrons. And some people say that that influenced the way in which the writers wrote and interacted. To what extent did Zora fall into that category? To what extent did she oppose that?
I would say that this is part of what I find so incredible about Zora and what bonds us in our love of her. Zora, probably less than other people, was a victim of that, because I think Zora at the end of the day would walk away and be poor. Like you couldn't leash Zora. And I think we need more of that kind of intellectual entrepreneurial spirit, right?
Yes.
Having said that, her Renaissance occurred in the 1920s, early 30s. What do you think contributed to the demise of the Harlem Renaissance? Some people say it's the Depression. The white people didn't have money to support the writers, but the writing spirit was there. And during that period, the American Negro Theater was founded, and a lot of other things happened in the black community.
Well, I think there was a shift between a kind of bohemian spirit, a kind of bohemian intellectual spirit that gave the Harlem Renaissance its full bloom. I think started to take this more protest turn toward labor and rights. So I think the kind of the creative spirit of the movement took this turn, and the author that comes to mind that's emblematic of it, I think, is Richard Wright.
And then James Baldwin following that.
Well, James Weldon Johnson?
No, James Baldwin.
Oh, James Baldwin.
Yeah.
Oh, James.
Nobody knows my name.
Oh, James Baldwin is just one
That's
of our
classic.
geniuses.
Yeah.
Oh.
But you say that creative spirit was being moved more from the intrapsychic to the political.
Right, but I think actually James Baldwin, his work is the marriage of the two in ways that other black male authors, I think, were not able to achieve.
Now we're in 2010, and the mode of communication is the mode of the hip-hop generation. How do we bridge this history and this intrapsychic analysis of our experience with the rhythm and the energy of the hip-hop generation?
Well, I think one of the things that always disturbs us is that I don't think there should be one reductive model of black expression. And so I think part of what we have to stop thinking of is that there is one voice. I think what we need is to really have the full blossom of the black experience, which is complex. We're all different. Some of us are nerds, some of us are, hip, some of us are reclusive. We need to see ourselves represented as we really are, and not say that one genre is representative of black life. It's just representative of what it's representative of. And so I think that is our biggest challenge in 2010, is to open it up so that we can have that diversity of representation across the board in all fields.
But the commercial world and the media tend to narrow it.
Right.
Yes.
The hip-hop has gotten into commercials, and it's gotten into politics and so on. And as a whole generation of people who communicate mainly through texting and hip-hop.
Right.
Now, how you are in the literary business, how do you get people to go back to reading again?
Well, I think that's the foundation of hip-hop in a way. Jay-Z has been on a media tour, and one of the first things he always opens with is how he came to music as a writer, having a notebook, writing down his thoughts. So I think that people are not connecting the dots.
Yes.
If you want to achieve this kind of success, it starts by processing and reading. You can look at all the Beyonce dance moves you want, but until you go into a dance studio and understand that it takes work and practice.
And training.
Training.
Very unglamorous
Right.
training.
Then you start to say, oh, these are the dots that lead to, a destiny. But I think we're so divorced from all the behind-the-scenes work these days, and are so focused
That is really true.
on what's on the stage that...
And instant gratification and instant success, which I think in the past there was more a model of work. I mean, we see it in the financial crisis. Nobody's saving. But I think that one of the things that's crucial for us as a people is to not buy into what the media is telling us we're doing writ large.
Right.
You know, and to really foster our own creative talent in our own communities.
Talking about creative, I was thinking this would make a great play.
We think that's our
Yes,
dream.
that's what we think. We think more than a movie. We think this is a play.
That's our dream.
Yeah,
we
we
want it to
think this
be
is
a
a play.
musical,
We do.
an off-Broadway musical.
Well, we don't want it to be the Scottsboro Boys, which I think is an absolute disgrace that they made a
Oh,
musical out of
God.
that tragic experience. But you have done something, both your enthusiasm and your understanding of Zora Neale Hurston, to bring this alive, which then leads me to when you're at the top of the mountain, what is your next project?
Well, it's a trilogy, so we're going to work on the second book.
Excellent. Now, what's the focus of the second book without telling us what it is?
It's the death of Zora's mother.
Death of Zora's mother. And also intraracial politics. We have Native Americans come into the picture.
Yeah.
So we have a lot of almost eminent domain issues, issues around property.
Now, to what extent do her heirs identify with this project?
They've endorsed it, which was huge for us, and they like it, which was even
Yeah, oh my
bigger.
God,
I don't
that's
think we would have
amazing.
continued with it if we hadn't gotten the endorsement of the estate, because we would have felt that we were somehow violating. This is a tribute to Zora's legacy, and if we had felt that we were violating it, I don't think we could have
Who
gone on.
holds the copyrights for her major works?
The estate.
Pardon me?
The estate, mhm.
Okay. So therefore, what you do will help them as well as help yourself and the community.
We hope so. They
We
really
hope
want to
so.
keep Zora's work
Work
alive,
alive.
and they were also hoping that young people would be able to find her sooner through our book.
Well, could you have a reading where young people could actually read some of the parts?
That would be lovely.
Yeah.
Well, this is the kind of thing that we want to happen in the literary world, to want to happen to understand the dynamics of the black community. And we're very pleased and proud that two young women like yourself will take this project on.
Thank
Oh
you
my
so
God,
much,
it's just
Dr.
been
Brown.
a
That means a lot.
pleasure.
Thanks.
Yeah, thank you so
Okay,
much.
Yeah.
today on African American Legends, we've been talking with T.R. Simon and Victoria Bond, Tanya Simon, about this great new book, Zora and Me. Thanks again for being with us today.
Oh my
Thank
God, thank
you.
you.
Very good.